Something that's been on my mind a lot lately is gay aliens. I say lately, and what I mean is basically all the time, every day. Okay, no, but really. Hi, I'm your alien boyfriend, and human beings are fascinating to me, because when it comes to a lot of their everyday experiences, in order to hash out their own feelings, they'll write stories. And you see this for all sorts of subjects, bad and good. If humans have a feeling or want to explore a concept, they'll make a movie, put it into a TV show, draw a comic. LGBT topics aren't exempt from this phenomena, and sci-fi is one of the genres more likely to explore them. In a heteronormative society, a lot of cis, heterosexual, and queer writers feel safest talking about these things outside the scope of humanity. But what does it mean to be queer in an alien society? I want to look at two pieces of media in particular to find out, and those are Steven Universe and the Transformers IDW comics. When you bring up topics like this, especially in the context of children or family-oriented media, but even in more adult fandom spaces, the question that always gets asked is, why does it matter? Who cares what aliens think about gays or trans people or bi people? Why does it matter what they view as queer if they view anything as queer? They're aliens. We shouldn't hold them to our standards. My response to this is sure, it doesn't have to matter to you. But to other people, the idea of their identity being represented or having a parallel in sci-fi or fantasy stories is important. The idea that someone like them exists outside of human spaces is good. More than just good, it makes them feel like they actually belong when a writer cares enough to represent them in some way. Seeing queer characters outside of human society is to say that this is not something unique to humanity. These are experiences that any person in any sapient society can have. Queerness is not something that humanity invented, it's a universal concept. And yes, there's the argument to be made that representing LGBT people through other species is harmful, but in my experience, it's only harmful if that's the only rep we ever get. And even then, only if that rep is handled poorly and if the aliens are seen as being weird or wrong or other for it. So many LGBT people have grown up used to representation outside the lens of humanity that we inherently identify with non-human characters regardless. Taking away this kind of representation does more harm than good in the long run. The solution is not to remove it, it's to diversify the kind of representation we see in all media, and to handle all of it with loving and careful attention. So I know what you're thinking now. Alien, why is this a topic you feel the need to explore? Aren't you alien yourself? You should already know all about this. And, well, yeah, in my own society. But when you're looking through the lens of someone else's, what does being queer mean to them, really? Even human societies around the globe aren't consistent with their metrics for this. And I do want to say, every mention of human society past this point does mean Western and typically, in that vein, American society, and the views presented in that context. I'm most comfortable talking about the experiences I have had, but if you have differing experiences, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. So, Steven Universe and the IDW Transformers comics both have a plethora of queer representation, and they both present strikingly similar societies to the point that they're both prime real estate for this kind of analysis, as well as perfect to compare and contrast with one another. No, wait. Let me explain. While Steven Universe is well known for its diversity, strong cast of primarily female characters, and good representation of women-loving women, or Wallawa, Transformers has gotten this reputation outside of its own fandom for being a sort of boys' club. Most continuities have a primarily male cast, feature little to no romance, and what women there are typically are relegated to either a token role amongst the robots or a supporting role in the smaller human cast. And sure, if you look at the toy collector scene, that's what you're gonna find. It's a boys' club, uninterested or outright flippant about the idea of diversifying the roster as a whole, usually ignoring any of the storytelling elements. Hell, some of them are even angry if any female Transformers outside the literal handful introduced in the 80s cartoon exist. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule, But who primarily creates and consumes the transformative works in this fandom? Who makes a lot of the fan art, a lot of the fanfic? Who, outside of the 5 to 15-year-old boy demographic, really pays attention to the actual media and storytelling output of Transformers? The answer to that is women and gays. And gay women. And James Roberts. I'm not joking. I think all my friends in the Transformers fandom are either women, gay, non-binary, or trans men. As of the time of writing, I'm only personally friends with one straight cis guy who's into Transformers for the story. And again, I'd like to emphasize there are exceptions to this in the wider fandom, but this is the norm. Especially in the circles I've run in, which are mainly on Tumblr. And this is so much the case that the IDW comics run, specifically in its later stages, noticed this and made changes to the typically widely accepted canon to better reflect and cater to its readership. Transformers are no longer non-romantic or only strangely all straight despite the lack of women. Now they live in a homonormative society, or a society where homosexual relationships are seen as the default. While Cybertron starts off being depicted as monogendered or even agendered as a whole, in later comics it's revealed that Cybertronians who were in some way exposed to other genders from outside societies could come back to the planet and say, well, this is how I truly am, and then reformat themselves to reflect that, as well as take on new pronouns. This means every femme, or female, from Cybertron is a trans woman. Colonies disconnected from Cybertron, such as Queerness, however, do have assigned genders outside of the monary? Is that a word? But that's a different topic for a different day. And yes, before anyone says anything, I am aware of the tragedy that was Spotlight RC, but as it's been sorta soft retconned and John Barber did work to explore her gender dysphoria and try to fix her narrative as a whole, we're just gonna ignore it for the most part. It's bad and it's semi-relevant, but for the purposes of this essay, I'm not going to consider it relevant. But enough about that, you say. What do you mean Transformers and Steven Universe present similar societies? I'm sorry for the confusion, I was wrong. What I meant to say was, Jim and Cybertronian societies are the exact same. Hear me out. Both Jim and Cybertronian societies are presented as monogendered, or agendered but coded as entirely female or entirely male. Despite this, in both societies, it's either shown in canon or told by word of God that these people may choose to go by other pronouns or find other pronouns more fitting. And this is in canon for Transformers. As far as Steven Universe goes, I swear Rebecca Sugar did an interview where she stated a Jim might choose to use other pronouns, but as of writing this script, I could not find the link to it. If anybody has the source, please let me know, and I can make an edit to the description to put that in there. Both societies are or were previously function-driven and caste-based, with Jim caste being based on type, and Cybertronian caste based on their alt mode, or, for the uninitiated, their non-robot form. Both even have overarching narratives largely centered around the rebellion against this and the upheaval that that brings, and the way that that sort of society affects the minds of its citizens even after that ideology has been uprooted. Pearl was created to be a servant, and she famously comments on feeling useless without Rose Quartz to give her orders. Peridot, too, even after her redemption and falling in love with Earth, looks at it from the perspective she's been taught as being a good source of resources if they could regulate their usage of it properly. Even liberated from her caste, she shows its function either consciously or subconsciously. In Transformers, when Cyclonus and Scourge are left to starve and die, Cyclonus states of himself and his fellow soldiers, with no function, no purpose, we're little more than illumination units. Melting these soldiers down for parts is the only way to give them back their honor, the only way to get back our dignity. The medic Ambulon limits the useless nature of his leg alt mode, given to him during a botched experiment in the nature of combination. It's heavily ingrained in them that without a use, they have no purpose. And both societies are non-organic and make a point of being so. Both gyms and Cybertronians, for the most part, are constructed for and only for their intended function. And both have an interesting relationship to their bodies. Not to sound like I'm gonna start preaching spiritual doctrine or anything, but while you might consider a human's body the human, both physically and spirit-wise, a gym is not their body, and neither is a Cybertronian. Their bodies are just vessels that carry their spirit, which is another object entirely. A gym's gym is their soul and mind, with the body being a hard-like construction projected from it. A Cybertronian's spark is their soul, with their processor being their mind and separated from it, and their body just the metal used to house the spark and processor and act for them. If the spark is handled carefully and continues to be fueled, it can be transplanted to another body, which is otherwise known as reformatting. If a gem is poofed, their body damaged to the point of destruction, so long as the actual gem stays intact, the body will reform, and they can change the appearance of it as they do so. The only thing that can truly destroy a gem is shattering, and even the shards of shattered gems are shown to still hold some kind of consciousness. The caste-based society in both species encourages the veneration and societal deification of the higher castes. With the gems, it's the diamonds and the upper crusts. With Cybertronians, primes and senators. Primes are even literally deified. They're seen as being chosen by the Matrix by Primus, or the Cybertronian god and creator figure. The acting prime and the lineage of them are even worshipped on the Cybertronian colony Queerness, and are all viewed as minor gods. And if you go against these higher castes, mutilation and death are the agreed upon punishments. Both Steven Universe and Transformers have a sort of dehumanization, if that's the correct word in this case, that takes place in them. With Steven Universe, we have the monster gems, which are brought about as of writing, yet unexplained energy attack by the diamonds on Earth. This is a corruption of the gems' minds that causes them to become feral and animalistic, unable to form a proper body or react on anything except base instincts. With Cybertronians, there's Impurata. This is the act of removing a Cybertronian's face to replace it with only an optic, and then their hands to replace them either with claws or simplified digits. This simultaneously makes them unable to emote, as most can, and brands them as troublemakers, and though it's not canon, I would argue puts them on par with lower caste disposable mechs. Rewind and Tailgate come to mind for this. Though neither of them ever faced Impurata, neither of them have faces, and both came from pretty much the lowest you could get on the totem pole of their society. Rewind was literally labeled disposable caste. This is a corruption of the body. Yeah, Steven Universe and Transformers can both get really dark. In both presented societies, individualization is discouraged, and you could even make the comparison between combiner teams, or gestalts, and gem fusion. But I think you get the picture. Because the Gempire and the Cybertronian Empire are so much alike, and yeah, there's another thing. Both have vast, sprawling empires, though Cybertron has lost control of its colonies. And because both mediums have a good amount of queer rep under their belt, there's ample comparison to be made between the two as far as what is the human and what is an alien idea of queerness. So, what is the human idea of queerness? In order to ask this question, we have to first define the word queer. And the definition of queer I am using is anyone whose expression of gender, sexuality, or romantic orientation does not fit into what is seen as societal norm. And for humans, that means anybody that is not cisgender, heterosexual, or heteroromantic. And here's where I snagged that definition from. I will put a link to that in the description. Steven Universe gained a lot of acclaim with its reveal of Ruby and Sapphire, a lesbian couple who fused to create Garnet, one of the main characters of the show and a staple in the cast. Recently, Ruby and Sapphire even got married, which is something that before recently almost never happened for gay couples in media, let alone media primarily made for and marketed to children, partly out of fear of unmarketability in countries outside of the US. Also in Steven Universe, Pearl is shown to love and be loved by Rose Quartz, although later in the narrative their love does seem to be more one-sided and mostly on Pearl's side, where Rose shares her love with human men and ultimately Greg Universe. While there were hints of Pearl's affections for Rose before the Garnet reveal, this wasn't fully confirmed until the episode Mr. Greg, when Pearl sings the now well-known "It's Over, Isn't It?", lamenting the loss of Rose to another person and then her loss entirely. Pearl later on shows attraction towards a woman known only as Mystery Girl, shown in the episode Last One Out of Beach City. Throughout the rest of the show, she refutes the advances of men, specifically Mayor Dewey and one-time Greg. So it's fairly safe to say that if she isn't a lesbian, which I think she is at least primarily attracted to other women, or per the agendered society thing, other feminine presenting individuals. Now, I can't think of any trans characters in Steven Universe other than perhaps Stevani, who has been confirmed by Rebecca Sugar to be non-binary and use they-them pronouns. But we've already talked about trans women in Transformers. And just to be specific, these include Luggin' a Note of Lost Light, as well as RC, even if her arc was handled poorly at first. Because of the way it's written, as stated before, any mech created on Cybertron that is a femme is canonly trans. But what do we have in the way of couples? Rewind and Chrome Dome of James Roberts' More Than Meets the Eye, later Lost Light series, debuted during Phase 2 of IDW's Transformers run. While there is a technicality with Tigatron and Airazor in Beast Wars due to dubbing in another country that cast them both as male, as well as Knockout and Breakdown in Transformers Prime due to confirmation by the comics after the fact, Rewind and Chrome Dome are the first confirmed in canon Cybertronian gay couple in all of Transformers media, not just the comics. And they aren't the last either. Like I said, after them came Knockout and Breakdown. We have the story of Brainstorm's one-sided love for Quark and the tragedy that befell them and what Brainstorm did to try and get him back. We have RC and Aileron. Aileron? How do you pronounce that? Hold up.
Aileron.
Okay, that makes sense. We have Cyclonus and Tailgate, a stoic, not a Decepticon, and a well-meaning but anxious mini-bot. Each of them teaching the other how to open up, and their story culminating in one of the few I love yous we actually get to see in the comics. Even in the more bittersweet leaning on sad ending for Lost Light, these two stay together and are shown to be happy and committed to one another because of, not in spite of, their differences. All that said, let's get to the real meat of what we're here to talk about. What does it mean to be queer in an alien society? To put things as simply as possible without reaching outside of my own scope, different cultures have a different idea of what does and does not constitute queerness. While Americans view being trans as queer, one of the quintessential types of it, in fact, if you're studying queerness through an academic lens, other cultures have long histories of recognizing third-gendered, non-binary, and trans individuals as completely ordinary and just a part of life. And one of the easiest ways to view any concept outside of our own experiences is through the lens of fiction. One of the best parts about both Steven Universe and Transformers IDW, to me, is that they give you characters that are queer from our lens, and then they give us characters that are queer from their own. And sometimes those two do overlap. This allows them to explore queer narratives and give us queer characters in a way that makes much more cohesive sense than saying, well, I don't know what else to tell you guys, everyone in space is homophobic. Everybody knows that. Part of what garnered Steven Universe so much acclaim when Garnet's true nature was revealed was the song Stronger Than You, which she sings as a tribute and testament to Ruby and Sapphire's love. More than just a message to Jasper, the Gem accosting her and trying to separate her in show, this is a message to the homeworld that tried to keep Ruby and Sapphire apart for their mixed fusion and caste disparity. And more than that, I would posit that this song is a queer anthem, stating that we are here, we are strong, and we cannot be held down or kept from our love for one another. The real and final message of this song is one of self-acceptance, telling others like Garnet that they can be strong like that too. You see, to Homeworld, the gender of two partners is not so much the problem. To Homeworld, no one really has a gender. Instead, it's mixed gem fusions. And in some cases, if Aquamarine's comments on Topaz are to be believed, fusions in general. Fusions in Steven Universe are metaphors for relationships, whether those relationships be romantic, friendly, familial, or toxic. But in a system like the Gem Homeworlds, one focused on every part working properly and in its proper place, there's no room for interpersonality such as that. Especially not cross-caste. The idea that one might rise above one's station in such a way would pull the whole thing apart, or that's what Homeworld's rulers would have you believe. Rhodonite is another fusion similar to Garnet, comprised of a ruby and a pearl, who both belonged to a Morganite before it was discovered that the two would secretly fuse. Both she and Fluorite, a fusion of 6 different unknown gems, were ostracized and had to live with a group of self-proclaimed off-colors or social rejects in a derelict kindergarten, a place where gems used to create other gems before it was stripped of its resources. Man, I didn't realize how much weird and specific terminology was in these things until I actually had to explain them to other people. Amongst gem kind, to have a relationship at all is to be queer. You can make a really strong argument for the claim that gem society is not just agender as a whole, but aronormative, or the norm to them is to be completely aromantic, having no romantic attractions or romantic relationships at all. You can even see this in Peridot's reactions to Garnet asking her to fuse with her. Though she started to accept Garnet as a friend and ally, she's still nervous and still caught in the idea that this might be taboo. Queerness in Cybertronian society is a little harder for me to pin down. Unlike Gem society, they don't frown upon romance. To the contrary, romance is seen as normal and natural as it should be, and because they are majority-coded male, they are a homonormative society. They have no reason to question same-sex couples when other sexes are so rare. But there are 2 things I think could constitute a queer identity for them. While transness in their society is not ostracized, it is viewed with curiosity and at times outright confusion. Not because the femmes in question are trans, but because they have a gender in the first place. Several times we have bots question their pronouns, wondering why anyone would bother being another gender, or why anyone would bother having gender at all. Even femmes from Qeerness are viewed with curiosity when they first appear for this exact reason. Thankfully, however, after initial curiosity, bots are content to say, okay, use their pronouns, and otherwise let them be. I would say regardless that having a gender at all would be queer for Cybertronians. Now this next one is a bit of a stretch and less traditional and more alien when you think of what could or could not be queer, but I guess that's ostensibly the point. In the Cybertronian society presented by IDW, while none of your identity is really focused on any sort of gender or attractions you may have, a lot is placed on your alt mode. Under the rule of the caste, alt mode was everything, and being alt mode exempt and thus able to pursue whatever career or relationships you wanted was a huge deal. Megatron changing alt mode several times from a mining vehicle to a blaster to a jet and then to a tank was a radical reclamation of his own identity. As low as he was on the totem pole, when he revolted, it was paramount that he find his own sense of self, and even then he never really settled. You see this too when looking at monoformers. Bots who either lost their ability to transform or chose to disable their transformation mechanisms and remove the pieces of armor that would belie their vehicle mode, known within the community as Kibble, to brand themselves. While First Aid says that shapeism-based hate crimes have mostly stopped by the time he comes into the story of More Than Meets the Eye, this still implies that they were a big deal and much more of a problem in the past. Purposely eschewing the concept of an alt mode entirely is just as radical as changing it. I would be lying if I didn't say that one of the reasons I chose these two pieces of media in particular was a personal one. Both Steven Universe and Transformers have been incredibly important to me since the moment I was shown them, in part because of the way they handle topics like this. While I discovered them far past the point in time where I could call either of them part of my queer awakening, they were both part of my self-acceptance. Cyclonus and Tailgate were actually the first gay pairing where I ever thought, wow, these guys should be together. And then they were, in canon. And while things like that aren't a huge deal for some people, as someone who sees a lot of myself and my partner in them, and as someone who grew up in a place where people like us were not so accepted or smiled upon, it was a huge deal for me. I hope, genuinely, that the world continues to put out media like this. I hope that as we continue to push forwards, more and more people can look at characters and things like these and say, well, hey, that reminds me of myself, and smile and feel genuinely good about what they're saying. Once again, I'm your alien boyfriend. If you like this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up or hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. Some of the videos I'm planning right now, actually, are a Defense of the Black Cauldron, a talk about Chosen One narratives and Animorphs, and something about the Super Herlock fandom from the Tumblr days of yore. If you want updates on those, I've got a Twitter over at alienboyfriend with a 3 instead of an E in alien. And if you want to support my content, I have a Patreon over at patreon.com/alienboyfriend. No 3s this time. In case that gets confusing, I got links in the description. Once again, if you have any opinions on this topic you'd like to share, feel free to leave me a comment, or if you have any suggestions for future content, I'd love to hear them. Let me know. That said, I will see you next time. Bye!